Should turn it off pretty soon.
That'll sound good to start it out.
Exactly. Sorry, I had some gas.
So, name and title for the record, please.
Irish Spring, Strategic Engineer for the VCE Alliances Organization.
What is the VCE Alliances Organization?
So that's the the VCE, which is the Virtual Computing Environment Company,
Yep.
Cisco, and EMC.
Okay.
So my job is, as a strategic engineer, is to work with them as an alliances engineer from a strategic perspective to do more big vision kind of collaborative stuff.
Okay. How long have you been at VMware?
Almost 7 years, so 6.5 years.
How'd you get involved with the labs initially? I mean, was it what you originally started doing?
No. I was a field engineer in the Great Plains region, working out of Kansas City, and they had a call for volunteers to work on the lab. And at the time, I had a customer that had just won the largest deal in the United States for ACE, the old Assured Computing Environment product.
Yep.
And so they had just won an award for it, and they wanted to do a lab on ACE. And the hands-on labs was a new idea. Everything used to be instructor-led.
Yeah.
And the hands-on labs started with a laptop. So I was on the ACE team for my first lab ever. And at that time, Hans Bernhardt was a corporate engineer. Dino Cicerelli was kind of the guy in charge of all of it. And Hans, myself, the guy who ran the labs, from a tech ops perspective, Mike Absher, kind of came up with the idea for the next year to make it even better and faster. And so I moved from the position of lab staff in the ACE lab to, at the time, we were the captains of that lab because we were the two people that were in charge of it. So Hans and I and Mike Absher started the concept off.
Cool. Very cool. So how did this evolve into something that would be done at VMworld? And on top of that, how has it changed since you first started doing it?
Well, originally, the lab idea was more like a presentation with a demonstration baked into it.
Right.
A phone call?
Okay.
It was a demonstration kind of with a presentation with a demonstration backed into it. Then we started thinking that the customers would really like to touch the computer and actually do the work. So the instructor-led labs were the first labs that we did, and we did those for the first VMworld in San Diego.
This was 2007?
This was 2006, I think, was the first one.
Okay.
First ever. It was the first VMworld.
Okay.
And I wasn't in that group, but Hans was, and like 5 other guys. And so they did instructor-led labs, which were basically guided demos. And they ran everything through laptops. So if they couldn't do it through a laptop, so that they would get sponsors and they would put all kinds of hardware in the front of the room, and then they would use this corporate image laptop to access the management software, whatever, things like that.
Okay.
And so that's kind of where it started, and then we moved into the self-paced labs as an option, because a lot of people didn't want to sit through a 45-minute guided demo. And so they started talking about maybe having some self-paced, some labs they could do on their own. And that's where we came up with the ideas that we were floating in 2007. Okay. But it was incredibly difficult to manage because we didn't have Lab Manager or VCD back then at all as products. And we ended up having to use Altiris to image a laptop to do a specific lab. And of course you couldn't have ESX in a laptop. So we were doing all the workstation products that we could, anything that would fit in a laptop we would do in workstation.
Right.
And we had to re-image every laptop every time someone got done, and we used Altiris to do it. But the really cool thing was we had this really wicked color-coded system. So we would stand in the room, and someone would get up from a lab, and we would go over, and we would hold up the color card that was the lab they were doing, and then hold up the station number, and the Altiris guy would then type it in and image the system. It wasn't very flexible because we could only have 5 or 6 lab titles,
yeah.
And we had to divide the room into groups for those lab titles, so we could only have the laptop do one lab.
So going from that to where we are today, how did we get to there?
Fantastic. So the next year after the Altiris debacle, we tried to get everything onto one laptop. And the one laptop idea was brilliant in its concept, but the actual management of it was terrible. So we had taken a jump drive that was 80 gigs exactly, and we had an 80 gig hard drive in the laptop, which tells you how long ago it was, 80 gigs, and we wrote this elaborate script that stripped out everything out of the Windows box that wasn't needed, and we could only run the labs on one laptop. You can only run it one time. And then we would run out with this 80 gig jump drive and plug it in, and with 2 USB connections, because the single one didn't work fast enough. And as soon as we plugged it in, it would re-image the laptop and put it back to normal. So in this way, we were able to go to every station, could do every lab. And then we thought we were geniuses on that. And so,
that is pretty genius for that time period.
Yeah. So every station could do every lab. And then we moved to Lab Manager the year after that. So now Lab Manager, Ford Donald, was creating something we called the VCEL, the VMware Systems Engineering Lab, which is what the SEs use to do demos and personal training on products.
Okay.
And he had been working on this project kind of as like a special project in the afternoons and evenings. And he had developed this construct where he could use Lab Manager to run embedded ESX hosts in Lab Manager configurations. And so it was a great idea, and we said, we could use this for the labs if we could just figure out a way to get a view session to tie up to a Lab Manager session. And so the brainstorming started pretty early in the year, and that's when Claire Roberts and Curtis Pope got involved. So remember, these guys are just desktop, they were specialists, and they kind of started hobbling and talking about it. And what they figured out that they could do is old-timey. We used to call it, 3 years ago, we called it Lab Cloud. And we don't call it Lab Cloud anymore because it's kind of grown past that. But Lab Cloud was the technology that took the desktop and then allowed you to take a view session and connect it up to. So you think about the technology. When you click on a lab, you select a lab, and we have to go out. At that time, it was to Lab Manager, launch a configuration, to deploy a configuration, use the right words, and you would deploy a configuration, and then we had a jumping off VM that was part of the network structure that had an external IP address. You got the public facing and the internal networking. And the public facing IP address would then be gathered by the system and spit back out to the thin client, where the thin client would then launch an RDP session to go to the manual on one screen, and then the interface to that jump-off virtual machine. Wow. And that jump-off virtual machine was the bridge virtual machine that you would do all your work from. So
what time period are we in right here?
This is 3 years ago.
3 years ago.
Yeah, 3 years ago. And so all this stuff came together literally, I think, 3 hours before the labs actually started. And it was brutal, but the Lab Manager part was ingenious, that we were actually running embedded ESX. So that's when embedded ESX first broke. It was because of Ford Donald. He had asked the engineering department, is there anything, can we do this? Because we'd all said, why can't we do this in our laptops and other things?
Well, we've always wanted to do it in Workstation for the longest time as well,
right?
Right.
And so he had to ask the engineering. I think in the beginning they actually had to make a special build for him that had that bit turned off, because it was just a restricted bit.
It's funny to know a little bit of history that's probably where that came from, that functionality for Workstation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great idea. Let's keep it up.
Yep.
So it was fun, because that was, just the amount of raw ingenuity. And that evening before the lab started, we had issues we were using ChipPC thin clients. They didn't have enough memory to run both RDP sessions at the same time. And so we had 2 Tiger teams, a team from Canada and a team from the U.S. down in Texas, that went to work on the problems to see if they could fix it. And so they're tearing it up, trying to see if they can fix it. Just doing backdoor, tearing open the thin client OS-wise, trying to get into it. And that evening we actually figured out that we'd have to deploy the manual not in RDP but through Swift, and then the RDP session could have enough memory to do what it needed to do. So literally in the middle of the evening, it was like 2 a.m, we're tearing apart the architecture that had been delivered, so that, software-wise, so that we could deliver it in another way. And that's the kind of stuff that really the labs were famous for. Yeah. Last minute, re-engineering, the smartest people in the room figuring out things that would take, the help desk and consulting teams years to do, and it was just instant and very organic.
Well, for what it's worth, that's really why I wanted to sit you down and have this conversation, because a lot of this stuff gets taken for granted.
Yeah,
and
it does.
And it's a good exercise, I think, for bloggers and for anybody that participates in this kind of stuff to really understand when they sit down in front of one of those labs what they're what they're sitting down, how many man hours have gone into what they're seeing in front of them on those two screens.
Well, there's a core team that works for Mornay Vanderwald and Adam Zimmern. And most of those guys, Dan and Anderson and all those guys. Those folks are part of the infrastructure engineering team. They used to be known as the Ghetto team. It was spelled a little bit differently than Ghetto, but they're the guys that run all the infrastructure. And almost all the infrastructure is donated for the show. So they get all this donated equipment in, and then they have to go build a massive data center the size of bigger than most of our enterprise customers. And then tie it all together with the right networking architectures and the switches, all the way down to even making sure the thin clients get donated and delivered through customs, right?
Yep.
So they have a huge process, and they're a full-time team. And of all of us, they're the only full-time team that focuses on V-forums and the trade shows permanently. Now their roles are changing here in the future, but that's been their job for a while. And then everybody else, the captains, the team leads, myself, Hans Bernhardt, this is a volunteer activity. And so the captains start working on the labs about 6 months before we launch VMworld. And this year was a little bit more difficult because not only were they writing lab manuals about products, but we wanted to have that solutions feel. So we had to make up a bunch of fake companies and register their names so we wouldn't be in copyright infringements.
We got in internal fights about which company we were going to choose and
exactly.
what we were going to name the fake guy. And it was,
exactly.
It was a lot of fun putting all that together just from that perspective of it for what it's worth.
Right.
We had our own little internal fights. We were going to name him John Locke and just little call outs here and there and stuff like that. But
that was the point though. We wanted the customer to sit down and go, oh yeah, this is what I'm working on.
And it'll be anxious to hear some of the feedback to see if they received it. So so we talked about 3 years ago with Lab Manager. The past 2 years has been vCloud Director since that has come out and everything. How has that changed the game?
This year is the only year we used vCloud
Okay, I thought it was last year as well.
Last year we used Lab Manager, and if you remember correctly, they discontinued Lab Manager last year.
Okay.
So we were using an outdated product that wasn't planning on getting any updates to its code base. And we had really reached the limit of what we could do in Lab Manager last year because we've got all these advanced products of vShield and all this other stuff that really is network heavy, and they need grown-up networks. But with Lab Manager, all we could do is that one private network, and very flat. And so the idea came that we could do it on VCD. But when we started building this, so the second year was great. We did that was the time we expanded the room. We did 480 seats, largest Lab Manager deployment.
This was 2010.
2010, and 480 stations doing View. I think at the time, we set it up in 3 days. It was one of the largest View deployments in such a short amount of time ever. Most of our customers take 2 years to put together this kind of a View environment. We do it in 3 days.
Awesome.
So then we went to VCD, and VCD was very difficult from the beginning. If you've ever deployed a VCD solution at a customer site, there's a whole way of thinking that has to go along with it. It's not just drop it in, do a demo, and you're off.
All kinds of new vocabulary and contextual considerations and stuff like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And to add to that, we were using, this nested virtualization solution. So we invented new words to keep track of what level we were at. It's like Inception. We have physical virtual machines that are running on physical equipment, and then those virtual machines may be running VCD and everything inside the V app. Then we have virtual machines that might be running ESX, and they have embedded virtual machines in them. So that's 3 layers of virtualization and 3 layers of virtual networking. And it's
not
incredible.
To mention the underlying infrastructure that's laying underneath that, right?
And the physical connections to
and
the
world. Physical connectivity to whatever data centers they are.
vShield security.
Over either WAN or MPLS or any of that kind of stuff, right?
Absolutely. It got very detailed.
You virtualized your virtualization.
Yeah, very deep, very quick. And it's nice to see how VCD handled it all. But at the same time, I could never imagine a customer doing this to themselves.
Yeah.
Because it's just so hard to keep track of.
It's going to be fun to see how the service provider in the public cloud market, what the uptake's going to be going forward in the next 3 to 5 years. Hopefully it's not that long, but
for VCD?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I agree with you.
I think it's got some maturation to go through before it really becomes mainstream. But it's getting there. I think what you've demonstrated here at the labs is is a good sign that things are going in the right direction.
Oh yeah, but I really agree with what you're saying about the 5 to 6 years, and I know the company doesn't want to hear this, but I think that the changes that you have to incorporate into your business are so huge, because we're not just changing some physical hardware. I mean, if you look at it, people run virtual machines like they run physical hardware. Yep. They back them up. They do everything to it like they would a regular system, and that was one of our big selling points.
I call it the 3 Ps: the people, process, politics.
Yeah, absolutely. I call it process, concept, and equipment.
There you go.
It's the same thing. We were changing the process of computing and how you bill it and how you charge for it, what you think about in a concept of a computer. And sometimes even the equipment has to be modified from your old thought patterns of what equipment is before you can actively do this. That is education that has to occur. When you think about it, and it can't be sold to the data center engineer. Yeah. This is a concept that has to be pushed to the CIO. Yeah. And most CIOs got to where they're at because of things that they knew 10 years ago. And so we're looking at educating a group of very highly educated people with a new concept and letting them take the risk to put it in.
I mean, without putting offense to anyone, I would almost say we would need to flesh out the current generation to bring in the next generation of what will be the CIOs and CTOs of 10 years from now, in order to bring in and wash away some of the old school 10 years ago, 15 years ago siloed mentalities.
I completely agree, because the silo mentality is what has made us so much money. Yeah. I mean, you and I work.
It's hard to let go of it.
Yeah, well, you and I work in the computing industry, and what we have sold and how we sell it, the management tools we sell to manage the mess we've sold them. People have really started focusing on. And IT has really started focusing on the care and feeding of the data center.
Yep.
We've lost track of the care and feeding of the business. And we've got to find a way to help our IT people get out of the data center, come up out of the basement, and start using, we're the smartest people in the building. And we've got to start using our brains to bring technology to the business. Whether it's iPads for the doctors or, virtual desktops for the remote workers. We've got to find a way to bring that technology to the business, or we're going to be, everybody's worried about the cloud, the public cloud being an outsourcing methodology. Of course it will be if all you do is take care of the data center.
So something a little more fun. There seems to be a lot of pranks and fun times around the labs in
Constantly.
the environments. Which would you say is your favorite?
Which prank?
So there's a lot of goofing off, not in the best of ways, that goes on around. So I'm just looking around here and seeing the stuff that hangs up. And
we have the Pin the Speedo on Irish. Well, it's Pin the Speedo on the Irish. We have an Irish Spring soap bottle with most of this comes from Hans Bernhardt.
Okay.
Because he's very much an energetic child in his mind. Some of the things you guys don't see is we have a hidden chicken in the room, and it moves every night.
Okay.
So Jack Morton, the production company that supports us, the production director that runs the room, runs around and moves that chicken every night. He does it in the middle of the night so no one can see where it's at, and he wants to see if he can hide it from Hans. So we play that game.
I did see him running through here with it earlier today, and now I understand what that was about. I think he found it right then.
We've got the wash your ass in multiple languages. There's a lot of fun that goes on, and the old joke is if we don't laugh, we'll cry.
Right.
So.
Well, I mean, so back to shop talk a little bit. You did something new, a unique experience this year with the partners.
Yes.
Cisco, EMC, and ourselves at NetApp. So far for us, but especially, it seems to be a huge success from the partner perspective. Barring Cisco's experience they had in Vegas, whatever, we won't go into that, but whatever that was, I hate it for them because they didn't get to participate. How'd you guys originally go about integrating the partner labs into what you had built as kind of your own little playground? How did you let other people come play in the sandbox?
So that was my idea.
Okay.
And what I had envisioned was we would have a lab room, if not as big, or a little smaller, set up in Vegas, and you'd have 2 huge lab rooms, and one lab room would be all VMware products, like the showcase lab.
Right.
And then maybe in a smaller one, we would have all of our partners that were ISV capable, and we would have them pay a little fee to participate and show off their stuff, and we'd run it in the same way with a check-in desk and everything, and only it would be their chance to showcase our partner ecosystem, showcasing the lab and the partners that work with us and some of the tools they have that make our products better. And so we were really looking forward to doing that, but it was too much footprint, too expensive to take up all that space, And I think we ran into an issue with there wasn't enough thin clients at Weiss at the time. I mean, I'm sure it was a joke, but they just couldn't send us 800 and 800 thin clients to get the job done. But so the compromise was, well, why not? Let's just have them, participate in our labs, and we picked the 3 partners that had been the most influential over the years in donating the equipment to make the lab possible.
Fair enough. Specifically with NetApp, since that's what I'm curious about, aside from the actual lab itself, can you give me any more details about our footprint in the lab, or what ran on us in a sense, or any details about our actual physical implementation?
And the back-end architecture.
The back-end architecture to make the hands-on labs successful in any way. And I'm wanting equal opportunity here across all of the vendors and everything. But
I actually I know that we run you guys. We have NetApp filers. I'm not sure which ones.
Okay.
And I'm not sure what architecture. Dan Anderson would be able to answer that perfectly.
Okay.
But I know that we use your guys' product. It's up, and we use your monitoring tools, not only to watch your product, but to watch the rest of our stuff.
Yep.
So that's a perfect example of a product that works for VMware in that it was written to work with us and to help us run and manage our own stuff. And it's actually up at the front of the room there.
Yep.
And we run customers by it all the time. And I know that when we were in Vegas, it was rough. We had a lot of hardware problems. We had an array drop on us. We've just tough stuff.
Yep.
And at one point, it was the NetApp guys who came over and were looking through I think it's Insight Manager, and they were looking through the Insight Manager tool and were able to identify some pretty critical things, and we were able to get back up and running.
I remember one was a vCenter server low on memory or something
Exactly.
like that, right?
Yeah, it was brutally low on memory. We had no idea what had happened to it, but the Insight Manager saw it. And we had VC Ops running, and VC Ops is very intelligent, but some people have said it's almost too intelligent, and it's hard to look through it to figure out what's went wrong.
Yeah.
It gives you pretty colors, but what do they mean, and how can you get to root cause?
Yeah.
But the Insight Manager tool was much more direct to get to the point of what had gone wrong.
Well, I mean, in the inverse as well, we've had people say almost the complete 180 of that. They want the pretty UI versus, they want parity and functionality, but they would pick the one. If parity and functionality was there, they would pick the one with the pretty UI, of course, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Pretty little green gears spinning around and stuff like that.
But that's why we have the VC Ops able to tie into Insight Manager, so that we can, absolutely be able to have the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
A tool that really knows our product and what's going on, that can feed algorithms to the tool, so that it can show us pretty pictures. So you get the pretty picture and the good work in the background.
Yeah. So you said this year was the first year you did VCD. What lessons have you learned, and what would you do differently next year, if anything? I mean, we've gotten through Vegas.
Yeah.
We're day 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4 in EMEA now. What would you do differently next year? A couple of quick lessons you've learned this year.
Number one lesson I've learned is never use a beta product for something that's going into production. We are the biggest deployment of VCD in the world, and the most aggressive, with more virtual machines being deployed and destroyed than any other VCD instance right now.
I saw the number of like 45,000 roughly when I walked in.
Yeah, we just rolled like 45,000 virtual machines today, and roughly I think 35 or 3,200.
Do you know ballpark the final number in Vegas? Can I get a tally going here?
I have those on the email. I can give them to you.
Okay, sure.
Roughly, it was like 100,000 virtual machines and 15 or 16,000 virtual machines deployed. Or labs taken. Yeah. And it was really cool because with the VCD, a lot of things were broken and breaking. I mean, we reached limits for VCD that we had never expected to reach.
Scale and limits of scale, is that what you're
saying?
Okay.
Yeah, because no one had ever QA'd it to that level. And so we were able to get this stuff taken care of, and there's actually a group of like 6 engineers that are sitting up there from corporate coding group, and they actually have the ability to go in and look at the charts and all the logs, and they're actually making bug fixes and bug reports for the product while we're doing this. And so we're the biggest generator of the bug reports, and we've actually made the product much better because of the holes that we found in it. But no one would have found for years because they never really push it like we
pushed it to this level.
Yeah. So you talk about lessons learned. I would say never use a beta product for production, but if you're going to, make sure the developers that wrote it are there.
Yeah,
because
to be able to compile on the fly right there in front of you.
And they learn so much from what we've done. And the other lesson, the first year that we used Lab Manager, we did a Tech Summit, which is when the engineers get together, and we had a labs at Tech Summit, and it was very nice to have the ability to use the labs at Tech Summit to kind of work out some of the bugs before we got to Vegas. And then after Vegas, there was a few more bugs that we worked out. And then when we got to EMEA, it was, snoozer. It was great. Everything was running perfectly. This year, Vegas was choppy because we had been using beta code and had pushed it really hard. The captains had very little time to actually write the labs because the environment they were supposed to develop in was broken most of the time.
Personal experience from that.
You know it, yeah. And so it was rough. And I think if we would have tried to use it maybe during Tech Summit, we would have been able to get some of the bugs out of it.
NetApp was one of the Diamond sponsors, one of the three. I'd love to hear from you what you'd like to see more from us next year if we do this again. And to follow up on that, if it isn't completely obvious, we're loving the exposure. Can we vendors expect to have more than one lab next year?
Well,
is that something that has been discussed or thought of?
It's really been discussed and thought of. The number one reason is there's just so much good that NetApp, you guys have a lot of stuff that integrates with us, and it's nice to have that ability to showcase it. And we've thought about having, this year we really pushed on to have a couple of products that you put in your showcase, and we really like the cloud group did 3 labs that were kind of build labs. So you built it, you managed, you deployed it, and then you managed it, which is kind of an old-fashioned way to roll things out. We'd really like to think about having the partners do like 3 labs, a block of labs. And those block of labs, instead of focusing on product, would focus on
solutions.
A solution that you would maybe build.
Absolutely.
How do you manage it once you've built it, and then maybe how do you grow it or change it once you've got it going. And that, I think, would be just awesome, to be able to not focus on a product or a group of products, but just like a customer would want to build something and then manage it. And how would you guys do that with your tools?
To wrap up, now that both VMworlds are over, this one wrapping up tomorrow, what are you going to do next?
From a VMware perspective, or for the labs?
Just you in general.
Oh, me. Well, we're actually
I was hoping for that. I'm going to Disneyland.
Yeah, I'm going to Disneyland. I'm going to go sleep.
No, what's next for the hands-on labs? What can users expect next year? What have you already got cooking upstairs?
Oh yeah.
Are we expecting massive scale, exponential growth upon what we've seen this year? Because that seems to be the trend so far for the last 2 or 3 years. Are we going to continue to see that expansion? Are we going to break 500 stations, 600, 700 stations?
I think what's really interesting is my initial knee-jerk reaction was, let's grow. But there's some other ideas that are even cooler. So there's a belief. No official group, no official project, but there's a belief that we might be able to sell this as a product to customers. In 2 ways. We could sell this lab concept as a professional services engagement to maybe a university that would want to have large rooms full of computer training architecture. We've also thought about selling the labs and their contents to customers. So maybe your customer is interested in SRM. You don't have $25,000 to put in, temporary equipment to do it, but maybe if your guy could log in and set up SRM in a manual, with a manual in a lab that you spend $100 on for a week worth of access, then you really have that ability to get intimate with the product. We've had ideas that maybe if you have a TAM account, that with that comes the privilege of access to the lab environment. So there's a lot of chewing on how we're going to take this to the public as a productized thing. Will partners have access through Partner Central? Will only the education department be able to use it? So from a where's it all going, there's that, and they've actually started hiring people full time to maintain the content year round. So that's a nice step. We're actually going to have somebody who's taking care of it.
So continue to as the products upgrade, you'll push the lab content forward as well.
Yeah, nice View 5 lab when we go to the next version. Nice. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. But that takes a lot of dedication.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that's something that everybody wants. So it's
everybody.
Every attendee that
comes. I pay a lot to do this.
Yeah, You know, they all get excited when they can download the slideshows from the breakout sessions and hear the recordings or see the videos if it's even done that.
Yep.
But I always hear, man, I wish I would have had more time to do
more labs. That's right. We hear that all the time.
Yep. However you end up pulling it off, whatever we have to pay, however we pull it off, I think that's paramount.
I think customers
it's good
want
exposure for you guys as well to continue to have that constantly available throughout the year, not just it's kind of a special niche thing at the VMworld shows.
Yeah.
So I don't really want to eat on that too much.
No one else in the world has labs of this magnitude ever.
So I guess you have to decide, do you let your baby go and have people be able to do it year round, or do you keep it niche special for the show?
Both, yeah. You pay your ticket for the show, you get this big lab experience, or from a sales perspective, you can try and demo and stuff. But the other idea that you talked about, going bigger, the other idea we're chewing on is, instead of going bigger, why not have an opportunity that if you come to the lab environment for the show next year, we'll have the labs, so you can see how what we're working on kind of is baby steps to doing the final feature. Well, you can't have a Weiss Thin client with 2 monitors connected to our bridge technology that takes you from your thin client to the lab. You can't have all of that done inside of your house. Yeah. So how do we modify things so that we can give you the manual and we can give you the lab access to the jump off virtual machine? How do we manage all that so you can do it from home? And if we can figure all that out, maybe next year we'll have a big lab room that's really cool. But if you want to sit in your hotel room and log on with your iPad to run a lab, then we'll have the ability to deliver it to your device. And that'll be a precursor to being able to take it home with you. And
that sounds good.
Yeah, so that's one of the ideas we're kicking around. If we could find a way, maybe we'll have an area of lounge chairs or recliners, and you can come sit in there and do labs. Yeah, lab lounge. That's a great idea. Oh, I'm going to take that name.
Go for it. But personally, I'll throw my 2 cents in. If I buy a badge, that should buy me at least 3 months worth of lab time.
There you go. Yeah, exactly.
So, because they're pricey.
Yes.
It's $1,500-ish something dollars for a ticket to come to VMworld now.
Oh, it's like $2,300. Yeah, it's really expensive.
So, I mean, at least give me a month or something like the amount of time that I have to view the content from the breakout sessions or something like that.
It's going to take some time to digest, right?
Absolutely.
And so you read a great breakout session on Site Recovery Manager and kind of maybe you listen to a customer testimonial about how great it was and how it saved them all this money. Well, I want to go check that out.
I want to see it in action.
How hard is it? Yeah. And the last thing that we're working on, so there's 3 big things that we're trying to pull off. And the last thing that we're working on is rich video content. Yeah. So PCOIP has gotten to the point now, and there's some other releases coming out in 5, that'll give us the ability to do this pretty much as we see fit. So it used to be you'd always worry about what kind of content you were going to stuff down the VDI pipe, and now we've gotten to the point where we have that ability with the maturity of the technology. And so, you come in, you check into the labs, we give you a set of stereo headsets, and maybe a lot of the setup for getting because there's a lot of time in the manual that goes through and explaining that here's the company, we're doing this acquisition. Right. Maybe we get a couple of actors that do the spiel. So, we're Joe Blow, we're getting acquired by big telco, and we're going to do all this. And that way the setup of the solution set is done through rich video. And then you get that experience of a view desktop delivering rich video. And from there, we step into the lab and start doing the process that it's going to take to do that integration.
Very cool.
Yep. So 3 big things.
So you got 1 more day left. What do you got left to do?
Well, there's a party tonight.
What's the target? What's the target numbers for tomorrow? We broke 40,000 today.
We broke 40,000 virtual machines today, and I think we broke 4,000 attended labs. And we're last year we had a goal of 5,000 that we destroyed. And we ended up being like 200 short of 6,000.
Okay. So you want to break 6,000.
And I'd personally like to break 6,000. We don't have an official goal. Someone told us this year that we weren't going to have official goals because of the VCD platform, and that was our goal, just to run it on VCD. So personally, I hope that we break 6,000. It'll be a real coup for me if we can break 6,000. And cool. With more than 4,000 labs in the bag, we only have to roll 2,000, and we rolled more than 2,000 today. Yep. It'll be a little bit shorter than it was yesterday, but
the 3,000 Scott Hans's rubber chicken.
That's right.
Well, Irish, thank you very much for the time. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
No problem. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
So off the record, I was looking at